when you look at Christianity before and after Mark wrote his gospel, completely different animals. They talk about Jesus completely differently. There's so much more agreement after, once they set that groundwork. Because even though they disagree with each other, at least they're working off the same basic storyline. Even though they're completely incompatible. They're either in lockstep or they're completely going into incompatible directions. But before the Gospels, we don't even have that to hang our hat on. You got people thinking Jesus is an angel, that Jesus is the firstborn of God, a hypostasis of God. When we read Hebrews, we're looking at what kind of things Paul and people in his generation were preaching about Jesus. And how come no one's ever going to find Arimathea?
Yeah, where is Arimathea?
Just happens to mean best discipleville in Aramaic. I mean, that's a little too on the nose, you know. If you don't believe in evolution, you don't believe in religion, because every religion I've ever studied is a Darwinian jungle on steroids.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And I'm joined for the second time now, David Fitzgerald, author of Jesus Mything in Action. I have to say that slow, mything, and you know what I mean. But there's a 3-part trilogy, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's right.
Yes, and it's about mythicism and myths of mythicism.
That's right. It's a trinity of a book. It's 3 books, but it's really 1 book.
So it's the Trinity. It's 3 in 1, just like Christianity.
Just that other guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So right off the bat, I want to establish this for people who write mythicism off right away. What are some of the myths about mythicism that people get wrong all the time?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because recently Bart Ehrman, who is for the staunch Jesus historicist out there, he's one of my favorite mythicist writers.
He's great.
Yet the last time he was on Holy Kool-Aid, he was talking to about all the things that he thinks are funny about mythicism, and Richard Carrier did a great response to it, by the way.
Yeah, I saw that.
But and it was like, dude, have you read anything mythicists have said since the 1990s? Because no one is arguing what you're saying we're arguing here.
Yeah, I felt the same.
And the ones who are the ones who we are criticizing the most of anybody, you know.
Right.
So I think that's probably the first one, and that was the first myth in Nailed, that the thought that Jesus is a myth is ridiculous, just right out of the gate. The funny thing, I wrote that in 2010, and the biggest surprise from writing that book was how much pushback we got, not from the Christians, but from atheists. And when I wrote Mything in Action, the big chunk of that was because I wanted to respond to all these criticisms we were getting from atheists who were saying, they were lumping this in with Holocaust denial and moon landing denial and flat eartherism. And it's like, mythicism might be wrong, but it has reasons for why it's there. It's like, we're not just doing this because we're big old mean atheists and we think it's a checkmate, Right. We're not doing this because we're trying to be provocative or hyperbole. We really think Jesus didn't exist. And when Mything in Action came out 7 years later, instead of getting, oh, no, there was definitely Jesus, I was getting, oh, no, I never thought Jesus was real. It's like, that's great. That's how much the sea change has happened in just 7 years.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of people lately have been really waking up to some of the points that are being made. It's not that it's just like something you can prove to be correct, and like all scholars are all wrong and we know everything, and they're
exactly. And it's not like we're trying to say it's a conspiracy theory or anything like that either.
Right.
It's funny. The people who dismiss it are the people who don't look into it at all.
Right.
But and like I've said before, and apologize if I said this already to you, but 20 years ago, if somebody had come up and said to me what I say to people now, I would have thought it was crazy. It never even crossed my mind there was no Jesus until I started wondering, hey, how do we parse out the real Jesus from the legendary bullshit that's obviously accreted, in the time? And which of the gospels is giving us the real Jesus, and trying to parse that out, the fake Jesus from the real Jesus.
Yeah.
And
I
well,
had Bart on, and I asked him that exact question.
yeah,
I said, all right, fine. I go, the strongest case for Jesus being a historical person, I think, is the Nazareth thing. So let's go with that. All right. So you got a guy from Nazareth. And I know you probably have a response to that, but
I,
hold that thought for a second. But
yeah,
I just wanted to get on the same page as him. And I said, okay, other than that, like what can we say about Jesus that's not drawn from the Old Testament
bingo,
and what's not
bingo,
drawn from just from like what was in the air at the time? And the only
that's
thing he can say was that a guy from Nazareth got crucified. That's it.
right. And it's funny because even he says that one of the problems he has with Jesus historicists, is that most of them can't make sense of why the Romans would crucify Jesus, and his apocalyptic prophet uh, uh, approach doesn't answer that. But even the Gospels don't agree on why the Romans would kill Jesus, and their reasoning makes no sense either. Because I mean, he's one of the first to point out that it wasn't blasphemous to call yourself the Messiah, and if it was, they would have stoned him to death, and the Romans wouldn't have any part of it. So there's so many things about the Gospels we get that just make no sense historically, and yet everyone insists that, well, there was probably a real kernel of truth at the very center of this. And I think that's the biggest difference between mythicists and historicists, is we agree largely on everything that the consensus says about Jesus, that he's unknowable, basically, because this couldn't have happened, this couldn't happen, this couldn't happen. We just don't insist that there was a real Jesus at the bottom of it all, that he was probably myth all the way down.
Well, you know what's funny about that is that even if there was a guy named Jesus who lived in Nazareth, does that still make mythicism wrong completely? Because everything attributed to him is something drawn from the Old Testament.
Bingo.
Like
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so that's like,
Robert Price pointed that out. It says that, even if there was a Jesus, and that's a big if, for all intents and purposes, there's not one anymore, because nothing we
yeah, I
have
heard him say that.
relates to that real person, if there
Yeah.
was such a person. Yeah.
And another thing about the being, calling yourself the Messiah thing, there was a lot of characters that called themselves the Messiah.
Oh, for
They
sure.
got followings. They
Right.
wanted the Messiah. That's their idea.
And we have historical evidence for them. They
Right.
made a dent in the historical record. And even though none of them did anything as remarkable as what even a merely mundane Jesus would have done, if the Gospels are even partially true, you know. Um, Here's the funny thing, too, though. And again, apologies if I've told you this, because I've been telling a lot of people this
That's fine.
this year. Um, One of the things that surprised me the most when I wrote Nailed was how many Buddhists would come up to me and say, you know what, we're having these exact same debates in our circles about whether Buddha really existed. And ex-Muslims were coming up to me and saying, yeah, we're having the same debates in our circles about whether Muhammad existed or not. And that one blew my mind. So I can
Yeah.
see Buddha being completely made up, but
Yeah, especially because they don't even know what century he was in.
exactly. And we've got we've got family trees for him. We've got eyewitness accounts, until I started asking, well, why do you say that? Well, because they don't really have family trees, and they don't really have eyewitness accounts.
It's someone saying they're the
And
family
it's
tree.
like everything they started saying about Muhammad looks like they're talking about Jesus, because the same dodginess. And so the crazy thing this year is what I'm really super excited about is I did a talk for the Global Center for Religious Research and for Recovering from Religion Foundation on the evolution of religion and on founding figures of religions in particular. And I went through all the top 10 world religions, the major world religions, and a couple others like the Baha'is and the Mormons, just to round it out. And I was just wanted to see how well that pattern is followed. All of them have the same exact dodgy backstory. Even modern religions that aren't even 1,000 years old, like Sikhism, is barely 500 years old, and it's got the same thing. It's like its history starts halfway through when the religion is supposed to have already started.
Right. And that's the pattern I notice in a lot of these
Yeah,
mythological characters is that you don't know anything about their childhood, and like they just
Yeah.
appear out of nowhere, and they're
Yeah.
and then like a lot of their stories are written about them way later. And
Exactly. Their
here's the
biographies
thing.
build and grow.
Yes. And
Yeah.
now you hear this all the time from mostly fundamentalists, but Gary Habermas says this, and he says that they talk about Alexander the Great. There not being any sources for them, or they're all the sources showed up way later. He says that half a millennium later. He says for Alexander the Great. What?
Exactly.
We have
that is the
we
proper
have
response.
we have cuneiform tablets from Babylon that literally say Alexander and his army came through here and defeated Darius.
Yes. We've
Someone
got physical evidence, textual evidence. We've got eyewitness accounts, though even the ones that didn't survive today, we know they existed,
Right.
And it's the amount of hyperbole in bagging on everybody else's historicity and trying to boost up Jesus' historicity. I mean, Jesus would be lucky to have any kind of evidence, like even one of the lesser figures, like even John the Baptist has better historicity evidence than Jesus does. Not enough that I wouldn't be surprised if he was mythological too, but it really strikes me how dodgy all of the major world religions founder figures backstory is, and B, how angry they get when you start poking around looking into the backstory of their founder figures.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And it's like, and this is what gets me. It's like I'm not expecting people to write down I saw a miracle or anything.
Right.
But if we had this character who's gaining all this following, and he did enough that even half a century later, people are still going to write about him.
Yeah.
You would think that energy would have been there during his lifetime and not later. Like there should have been somebody, at least one person.
Absolutely. I made that point nailed too. It's like, we don't have to rule out a priori miracles, because Christians hate it when we do that. We just said, okay, let's say miracles can happen. Where's the evidence of it? Where are people talking about it? Where are people freaking out about it?
Right.
It's crickets. Even when you read Acts, which is probably made up, but if it's based on any kind of real Christian history, all the trial transcripts for like Peter and Paul, the Romans are scratching their head about, I don't know who this Jesus guy is. It's some new Jewish spinoff, and it's some twitchy part of their religion. It's like, don't you have him on the Jerusalem's most wanted list? Because didn't the entire town just recognize him as the king of the Jews, and then he escaped from the capital punishment, and his followers are still around, and he was supposed to be reappeared for 40 days. It's like where there's nothing of that. There's nothing.
It's like a black hole of history.
Bingo.
For that whole time. Yeah. And I just noticed this actually because I was talking to Mike Lacona.
Yeah.
And I was reading right before I interviewed him. I was reading this passage in John where Pilate's like, "Oh, it's your custom." He's talking to the Jews. "It's your custom that I release one prisoner and let one go." And I remember when I was a Christian, my pastor used to think this was a fulfillment of Leviticus 16, which is the scapegoat, which is Yom Kippur, the holiest day of Judaism. Which is like theologically, that all makes sense.
Right. And that's the thing. Theologically, allegorically, everything about it makes sense.
Yeah.
Historically, nothing.
Right. And this is exactly the point I was getting to.
Yeah.
I bring it to Mike Lacona because he's a critical scholar, even though he believes in it. But he's facts based as much as possible.
There you go.
So I knew this would be a problem for him because he has to be real about this. I go, well, where do you see this being a custom of the Jews? And he goes, "Oh, this is Pilate's custom because it says in Mark that it's Pilate's." Which I was going to say,
even the Gospels don't agree on where this.
And that's the point: is that you have this disagreement, and when you have that much disagreement on these major, that's a major detail. Is it the custom of the Jews or is it not? That's a big deal. They should know this, and especially if Jews wrote this too.
And Christians have been ransacking Jewish records, Roman records, trying to find any kind of evidence for anything like that. Nothing like that.
Yeah.
And even the portrayal of Pilate in the Gospels is just freaking ridiculous compared to everything we know about him.
It's the opposite.
Yeah, just the exactly.
It's just the opposite. If you read Josephus's writings about Pilate,
Yeah.
Everything he's doing in there is the opposite of what he's doing in the Gospels.
Right.
In
I
the
think Suetonius as well, if I
Yeah,
remember.
I think so.
There's another one, or maybe it was Philo. But they mentioned, anytime the Jews begged him to do something, he wouldn't, and anytime he
Right,
begged him not to do something, he wouldn't stop.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
Josephus talks about him slaughtering all the Jews
Yeah.
and because he was trying to bring some statues in, and they
Yeah.
rebelled, and it says
Yeah.
that, like, or I think it says thousands of them were killed.
Well,
Like,
maybe so. I
that
mean,
should be in the Bible.
a bunch of them been down and bared their neck, saying, "Okay, you go ahead and kill us," and that was what ended that thing. But when he finally got recalled to Rome, where he may have even been executed when he was recalled to Rome, because he disappears from history at that point. But it wasn't because he was reluctant to. It was because he had one too many massacres on his head, and
Right,
he finally went too far and
yeah,
killed a bunch of Samaritans, I believe.
yeah.
But yeah, it's ridiculous that this dithering little Nancy boy who's like, I find no fault with him, you know, and who's getting pushed around by the Jews. That is what really kills me. It's like, this is the Roman governor. You don't talk smack to the Roman governor, you know. Uh, yeah.
And then you got the narrative of Joseph Arimathea being like, "Hey, can I take him down and bring him home with me as a souvenir?" Like, no, it doesn't happen. The Romans are supposed to keep the body on the cross until it turns into a skeleton. Like, they don't take it down
Right.
ever.
And
That's
here's
what it
the
says in
thing.
all the records.
Joseph of Arimathea is another one of those characters that shows up in all the Gospels, and the Gospels cannot agree on who he is or what he is. The most common is that he's a member of the Jerusalem Sanhedrin, and if he's from the Jerusalem Sanhedrin, what's he doing being from Arimathea? He should be Joseph of Jerusalem. Um,
Yeah, the
if he was in the Sanhedrin, how come the Sanhedrin vote was unanimous to kill Jesus? And how come no one's ever going to find
that's a good point.
Arimathea?
Yeah,
And
where is
Arimathea
Arimathea?
just happens to mean best discipleville in Aramaic. I mean, that's a little too on the nose. Like
Yeah,
so much in the
it
gospel.
does mean that. I found that out,
Yeah.
and I guess there is a town, but it's not
Oh,
Arimathea. It's like
there's been
Martha or
many
something.
people say, well, maybe they meant Ramathoian, maybe they meant
Ramathor, that's
this,
the one.
maybe they
Yeah,
meant that. Yeah, it's like keep guessing because you're not going to find it because it never exists. No one ever mentioned it before the Gospels, and
right.
no one's ever found it since. Um, yeah,
And he just walks in there like he owns the place and says, "I'm gonna take this body down." And
yeah,
yeah, sure, yeah, go ahead, yeah, have fun with
right.
that.
And it's kind of coincidental that his name is Joseph, which is a Jewish name assigned with Jesus' father and with Joseph the patriarch and all these other symbolic meaning. In
What do
fact,
you think about Dennis MacDonald connecting this to the Iliad?
I was just gonna say, there's so many examples of things that we have plentiful examples that it was taken from Jewish scripture. That's no problem.
Yeah, oh yeah,
But he's pointed out so many examples where it also seems to be taken from Greek classic literature, like the Iliad, like the Odyssey. And it's obvious that whoever wrote the Gospel of Mark had a Greek education, just like
well,
Matthew,
it's
Mark,
written in
Luke,
Greek too, so
John.
it's not.
Um,
When people
it
roll
is,
their eyes in that and they say, "Well, oh come on, these were Jews." Well, then why is it in Greek?
and why is there puns that only work in Greek, not Aramaic, not in
Right.
Hebrew? Um,
Yeah. I
uh,
think this is sophisticated text written by some people who know what they were doing.
it absolutely.
I'm not gonna go full blown Roman Providence on everybody.
No, no. And
I,
let's make that very clear too.
yeah,
It's like all those guys who were saying that the Flavius Josephus invented it or the Romans invented it later. It's like you have to ignore so much religious evolution for decades, if not generations, if not centuries, to come up with that nonsense. It's like if you're smart enough to concoct that, you've got to be smart enough to know why it's a non-starter right from the get-go.
right. And you would there you that they would be able to figure that out. There'd be evidence of that.
Yeah,
Why would they if he wants to make himself be worshipped, why would he want to do it indirectly that he gets forgotten about and some Jewish guy gets all the credit for them worshiping him secretly? That
yeah.
doesn't
It,
make any
it
sense
makes
right there.
no sense whatsoever. Yeah. Now, on the flip side, if you want to say that there's traces of like the emperor cult that tropes from that came into Christianity, I have a lot easier time believing that because
Yeah.
that's very possible.
Yeah,
There's
there's
so
definitely some
many there's
connection.
so many possibilities and so many sources that look like they went into uh, our gospels. That doesn't surprise me at all. But to say that it was invented, long after the fact, if anything, it's older than that.
Yeah.
Um,
especially when you look at the Vespasian narrative
Yeah.
where he spits on the guy's eyes and then all of a sudden you can see. That's like, that sounds like what, I mean, I'm not saying that's what they're copying, but he could have heard that story when he was writing the story about Paul.
Well, I was gonna say that's textbook. We still have magical textbooks from the Roman times. That is textbook how to cure blindness with mud and spit. That's something. That's just one more example of Jesus doing something that everybody did back in the day.
Yeah.
It's just it's a trope.
Do you think that the Eucharist, the blood and the wine, drinking the wine and eating the bread, do you think that has like Bacchanalia roots or some Louisiana mysteries thing there?
I do. I mean the Canaan wedding, the water to wine. That's right out of Dionysian
Yeah,
ritual.
that's
But
pretty obvious.
I'm with those scholars who argue that Christianity started as a Jewish version of the Greek mystery
Absolutely.
faiths, and that's another example. It's like they had baptisms, they had secret handshakes, they had secret vocabulary, they had Lord or Ladies suppers, and we still have invitations to them. Um, and
I would compare it to how we have our movie and music industry today, where you can have a brand new movie come out from, I don't know, Steven Spielberg. I don't know. I'm just making throwing stuff out there, and it could have all its original things and whatever it wants to do, but it could be borrowing motifs
for
and
sure,
and themes from other
yeah,
completely different genres or completely.
yeah,
It doesn't mean they're copying. It just means, oh, they like that idea.
yeah,
It gets inspired. It gets into, what's the difference? I mean, these are
right.
people back then, just like there's people today.
Yeah, and apologists who try to say, "Oh, Christianity has nothing in common with the mystery faiths," the only way they can do that is like by defining it so hypercritically that
Yeah,
no mystery faiths count as a mystery faith. It's
right.
really ridiculous to see the mental gymnastics they do to get around that.
Yeah,
Um,
and they focus on the real small details and
yeah,
compare those, and yeah, sure,
or any
different, not
difference they can
the
get a
same.
hold of. It's like, of course, there are differences. Every mystery faith is different from every other mystery faith, but they're all still mystery faiths.
Yeah,
They're not cookie cutter copies. They are a mystery faith.
yeah, and
Um,
I think the biggest thing that, and this is why it kind of bothers me when people write off mythicism completely and say
yeah.
scholars don't agree on it. Okay,
Oh,
this is what bothers me about that is that there are, when it comes to the sources in the first century, there's almost nothing until
yeah,
like Josephus, even if you want to go there, and
yeah.
even that we all know, all even believing Gary Habermas and Mike Lacona all agree on it it's at least interpolated.
Interpolate. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Nobody thinks that little passage, the testimonium, isn't a forgery. The argument that as they push the field goals is, well, it's only a partial forge. It's only half a forge. No, dude, no. But I like what Bart Ehrman says about this. I mean, I spent a whole chapter explaining why, no, this whole thing stinks of forgery, and so does the other uh, passage. It doesn't stink of forgery. It's just not about our Jesus, full stop. And, there's, anyway, but,
Well, here's, think about it. It's like you got this guy, you're gonna write about him and say, let's say he's a man, if you want to call him a man. And by the way, he died for 3 days and was risen on the third day. He was called the Christ. Okay, if that's what you're gonna say, and you believe that, then the rest of everything you're writing about should be based on this guy. You
right,
should have, because
right.
if that's what you think and you believe this, and you're the first guy in history to write this, by the way. It should be
And
all over the place.
fun fact, no one seems to notice this passage for the first 300 years, and no one after it until Jerome knows. So, like, there's 500 years, half a millennia, where no one knows about it except this guy Eusebius. Anyway, but
That's such a
here's the
good
thing:
point.
Bart Ehrman says, he points out, even if every single word of this were true, it's only saying what Christians were preaching at the end of the first century.
Bingo.
And here's the thing: if you don't have Josephus, and I think we don't, the reason they fight so hard, tooth and nail, to grab some scraps from that is because without Josephus, you've got nothing to corroborate the Gospels in the entire first
First
century.
century.
And we're already talking in the 90s anyway. But I mean,
I was just
otherwise,
hearing David Litwell last night. David Litwell last night said Christianity is a second century invention.
yeah,
That's his own. I don't know if he's on. But that's
it,
a big statement to make for
that is a
a
big statement.
scholar like himself. Like,
And, and
because
I think it may well be, even if it came out of the Jewish war in the 70s, you know.
Yeah.
But the fact is, when you look at Christianity before and after Mark wrote his gospel, completely different animals. They talk about Jesus completely differently. There's so much more agreement after, once they set that groundwork. Because even though they disagree with each other, at least they're working off the same basic storyline. Even though they're completely incompatible, they're either in lockstep or they're completely going into incompatible directions. But before the Gospels, we don't even have that to hang our hat on. You got people thinking Jesus is an angel, that Jesus is the firstborn of God, a hypostasis of God. You know, all these different.
Yeah, Hebrews says he's the highest of all the angels.
Yeah.
It even calls him a high priest, like
Right.
Melchizedek.
Right.
And then,
and everything he does is on that celestial plane. And
right.
I think when we read Hebrews, we're looking at what kind of things Paul and people in his generation were preaching about Jesus. A Jesus who they found when they studied Jewish scriptures, who was speaking to them through revelation and through what they said. And again, he tells us that this happened. We know he was crucified and killed according to scripture. We know he rose on the third day according to scripture. He constantly.
And this is that. And what you're saying right now actually leads one to finally like stomp out the whole Roman providence idea, because this is what you're talking about is a very Enochian. I don't know if you've ever read Enoch, but Enoch, the way he, like, the literary motifs, the themes in there, the Son of Man, the Holy One, like the way it describes going up into heaven and there's 12 thrones, and you know, basically it sounds like Enoch's almost being deified, like he's becoming,
for sure,
he's returning back to earth first of all. So this Jesus being going up to heaven and returning back to earth, he's not the first one to do this. Enoch did this before.
So and you've also got Jesus compared to Melchizedek as well, you know,
right?
Kind of, all these mysterious figures that make their way from the Hebrew scriptures.
And that's why this what it looks like is that there's Jews, or whoever they were, Hellenized Jews, that were trying to make sense of why we're losing all these wars. Why is the temple falling? Why is the temple, Pompey the Great, he went to Jerusalem and they were like, if you step a foot in our temple, Yahweh will smite you. Is it right in our? He said, oh yeah,
here we go.
He went right in there and took everything out and left. And so they're like, what is going on? Where's Yahweh? So they're looking back and they're reading Enoch and they're like, oh, you know, it's all about this, and they're forming their worldview into what can make sense at the time.
Exactly. And I think that's why we have the Gospel of Mark. It was written to explain why the Messiah didn't come and save Jerusalem the way everyone expected him to, or at least the way some Jews expected him to, because in the first century, there was so many branches of Judaism. It was never so diverse as it was then. So whatever the Messiah wound up looking like, there was a Jewish group that said, we've said that all along. We knew that was going to happen.
Well, you know what's funny about that is in Josephus, when it actually does talk about Jesus, it's right after Pontius Pilate. It's in the same book, in the same chapter.
Right.
And I almost wonder if the events of Pontius Pilate slaughtering the Jews is sort of like, whoever's writing the Gospels is sort of allegorizing the events of the death of Israel being the suffering servant, like in Isaiah.
Well, definitely whoever wrote the Gospel had the suffering servant in mind, and many other passages. But
for sure.
Again, Josephus didn't write that. He didn't write a word of that, and that's 300 years after the fact. Anyway.
No, I'm not saying that the person who put the Josephus thing is
gotcha.
Is connecting that. But for me, this is what it was like. It was like one of those. It was like a light bulb went off. I'm reading this passage of Pontius Pilate killing the Jews because he wants to bring his statues in. Then all of a sudden it's like Pontius Pilate killed Jesus, and I'm like, huh.
Well, here's the thing. You know the story about Jesus ben Ananias, that yokel in Jerusalem, who's a crazy man who was doing end of the world talk, and you know.
And he says, "Oh, woe to me," and then he died.
Yeah, exactly. I used to not to put too much credence in it, but the more and more that there's just too many coincidences between that Jesus and our Jesus that Mark didn't use him as a figure too, or at least even a half remembered version of it.
And this is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I'm almost wondering if the people who are writing these gospels are sort of allegorizing the time period and making Jesus as like the personification of Israel, of what the Messiah
Yeah.
is supposed
Yeah.
to be like. He
I mean,
is taking on the sins, and he's doing this, he's doing that.
yeah. Well, his name is super apt, and there's so many characters and places that are super apt, like totally on the nose, over and over again. And I think if we read Greek, it would be a lot more. The allegorical nature of them would be a lot more obvious to us, I think. Luke definitely knows Josephus because he keeps copying from Josephus for window dressing, and he doesn't always get it right, and that's how we know he's copying from Josephus and not the other way around.
M. David Litwa thinks that Luke Acts was written in the 2nd century.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised at all, honestly.
Which would be mind blowing if somehow that got proven, or more scholars started to believe that thing. That would be mind blowing.
Well, let me tell you what we do know for sure. Luke copies from Josephus in a book that was written in the year 93 or 94. So that's the earliest it could possibly ever be, and it's probably
only
later
6 more years.
Yeah, and boom, and then you're in the 2nd century. And in the 2nd century, you've got the letter from Trajan and Pliny and Trajan, where basically the attorney general of the whole Roman Empire is talking to the emperor and saying, "I never heard of these Christian guys before, so I tortured them and got information. But have you heard of these guys? I've never heard of these guys."
It's like they're just hearing about them for the first time.
Invisible. It took them hundreds of years to even become a minor cult in the Roman Empire.
Yeah, because you look at Philo. Everything Philo's writing about, it's almost like he would be the first one lining up to be a Christian if there really was a Christianity.
Well, and so much of stuff that came straight from Philo became
Christian. They're borrowing from Philo.
The Holy Spirit. That's pure Philo. Yeah.
He talks about God being of nature of 3.
Yeah.
He has a chapter called "Who's the Divine Heir of All Things," and he says in that chapter, or it's a book, I think. He says in that book, the eternal Logos is the divine heir of the Father.
Yeah. Christians ate up all this stuff.
Dude, that's Christianity right there.
Exactly. And
I think the church actually venerates him as like a saint or something.
It wouldn't surprise me if they did, because I mean he should have been written about Jesus. If there was any kind of guy making any kind of hubbub in Jerusalem at that time, Philo was right in place to comment about it.
Philo died in 40.
If he was teaching some radical new thing.
He was alive in the 30s too, so he would have been alive to be able to write
during,
something.
And after.
Before,
during, and after.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Before, during, and after Jesus.
Yeah. And his family they were aristocrats. They were really involved with the Jewish temple. It's like anything that happened there. They
marries his daughter, or somebody marries into the Agrippa family line.
Right. And Luke takes advantage of that. Yeah, Berenice.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Luke, whoever Luke was, is constantly like dropping celebrity bits in there to beef up his story. And Berenice and Agrippa. Another reason why we would have known about it from either Flavius Josephus or Philo is because they were connected to all these people, that get name dropped in the Gospels.
Then you got Pliny the Elder.
Mofogi. Hey, Togepoke. What's that now?
You got Pliny the Elder.
Yeah.
Writing in Caesarea. How do you say it?
Caesarea.
He's in Caesarea. That's what that's where he's writing all his encyclopedia stuff.
Yeah.
He goes out and he meets the Essenes. He writes a whole book about them.
Yeah.
These weird Jews, they're out in the desert doing all this weird stuff.
Yep.
He would have been perfect one to
and I wish he had written about early Christians, or even John the Baptist cult. I would love to know what he thought about those guys.
Yeah. So even if Jesus was around, I mean, let's say whether he existed or not,
right?
He would have heard about him at least,
right? This is the thing.
Someone to mention.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's this guy. He claims to be the Messiah. He's crazy. We don't like him or something. I don't know, something. Yeah. But
yet we have over a dozen of these wannabe loser messiahs who barely do anything worth noting, and yet they all make a dent in the record.
And they don't get killed by the Jews; they get killed by the Romans.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't. The Jews are wanting. They're looking for another guy to rise up and say, "I'm the next Judas Maccabees." You know, they're looking. This is their thing. That's why I don't understand how it gets like the way the gospel writers describe the Jews as being so like, no, you can't be the Messiah. It's like that doesn't make to me. It's
It
like,
makes no sense. Here's the thing: the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they're the big heavies in the Gospels. In real life, they hated each other.
yeah.
The Pharisees would have loved somebody
Oh,
like Jesus.
this is such a good point.
Yeah.
The Pharisees were like inspired by the Greek philosophy a lot. Like that's
Yep.
how
Yep.
Josephus describes it. The
Yeah.
Sadducees were the ones that were following the Torah. They were the ones that were in the temple. They were the Levites. They were
But they were also the Roman toadies who were sucking up to the Romans.
right.
So the Sadducees,
why they're
they were
still
the
alive.
big fat cats who were
Yeah.
controlling the temple and the temple sacrifice system. And not only would the Pharisees have loved somebody like Jesus, taking him down, they would have, when he's casting out the money changers, they would have loved that. But when they say in the Gospels, oh, Jesus doesn't teach like the scribes and the Pharisees, he teaches this new, he said, no. Some of his teachings come exactly from the Pharisees. And the reason the Pharisees are the bad guys in the Gospels is because in the 70s, 80s, 90s, second century, after the Roman war, that's when Christianity and the Pharisees start bumping heads. They're rivals with each other. They're sisters religions, really.
Yeah, in fact,
because both of them come out of that destruction of the temple.
Yeah, it's like Hellenized form of Judaism. You got the character named Hillel the Elder. He's one of the founders of the school that turned out to be like the people who wrote the Talmud, like that line of thinking. But anyways, he was a Pharisee, and his famous quote. It's even on his Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
But his famous quotes in the Talmud too is that the fulfillment of the Torah is to love your neighbor. That he says that is the whole of the Torah.
The whole of the law.
So
yeah.
These ideas are being influenced into Judaism as far as
sure.
I think he was living in like the 40s BC. So that's
I get him and Gamaliel's timeline mixed up, but yeah.
Gamaliel's the next generation down.
Yeah.
I think Gamaliel might have been his son actually, or something. Or
okay.
Student or son, one of the two.
Yeah.
But anyways, long story short, those ideas are already. That's not Jesus coming up with this.
That's the thing, and that's the thing I wanted to point out is that none of these are new ideas. You see, Stoicism, Cynicism, Phariseeism, all these things come straight to the gospel of Jesus and get put in his mouth. Even things from like Greek plays. It's like it's not even just religious writings, but even sometimes popular culture. You've got Jesus or coming down in a vision and saying a line from a play in Greek. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
It'd be like the Virgin Mary quoting Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah. That's crazy. There's a lot of that though. There's a lot of for example, I think the glaring one, this is a big Dennis McDonald one, but it's undeniable, where he says that when Jesus is being anointed by the woman, she's rubbing his feet with the oil and drying it off with her hair.
Yeah.
Well, turns out that in the Odyssey, Odysseus is being anointed with oil and his feet are being rubbed. The girl's name is Eurycleia. Eurycleia means far and wide in Greek. Now check this out. In the New Testament, Jesus tells the girl that your fame will be told far and wide. It's a literal pun on the name Eurycleia.
And it would have been so obvious to anybody reading it back then that, oh, look what he did.
There you go.
Clever. Yeah.
There you go. You got a Greek
there's so many
audience.
literary things in Mark that even though his Greek is coiny and it's like a deliberately folksy Andy Griffith, all shucks, folks, do those Duke boys got run again in trouble again. It's very folksy Greek, and yet the literary structures of it, the chiasms and the chiastic structures and the intercalations that he does are very, very specialized, very sophisticated, and it's another totally obvious point that these are literary constructions. These are not oral tradition. These are not stories. It's not the telephone game. No, these are literary constructions right out of the box.
You know what I was thinking about? The biggest mistake people make when they're trying to talk about Christian origins is they separate Israel from the rest of the Roman Empire. Like there's this big giant wall, force field. Like there's no influence going inside and out. Like, no, they're on the Mediterranean. They're talking to people from Egypt. They're talking to people from Syria. They're talking to people. There's travel and trade happening.
Yeah,
They're going to be
absolutely.
influences from outside and from inside. It's going to go
And
back and forth.
you're so right. And we even do that with religions today. We think, oh, Christianity, this big monolithic block. Oh, Islam, this big monolithic block. Judaism, they're all separate. No, they are so intertwined and evolved from each other.
Yeah.
Those roots go down, 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 down. And yeah,
That's why I've been getting so big into David Litt lately, because he doesn't just look at Greek mythology and Judaism, and he's looking at like dead religions from Egypt
yeah.
that are like no one even heard of, and he's
Oh,
like
yeah. Oh,
he's writing showing you how there's like traditions from those that make its way into early Christianity and all that. Like,
yeah. And I was talking about that talk I gave on evolution of religions. Without religions like Zoroastrianism, we wouldn't have Judaism. And
yeah,
all these religions are a lot younger than we think they are. We think of Moses being, 2008. It's like, no, 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 he
no.
wasn't 2000 BC. First of all, he didn't exist, but even the stories of Moses did not show up until centuries after the fact.
I think what happened with Moses is probably similar to what happened with Jesus. Is that you got Jews who are trying to make sense of a certain time period
Yeah,
in the past,
yeah,
and they allegorize it.
yeah.
And I think, and I was talking to Joshua Bowen about this. I asked him this.
Here's the book. He's the book I've been just reading, The Atheist Guide to Old Testament.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
great. Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
I asked him, I go, do you think that it's possible that the splitting of the Red Sea in the Exodus can just be an allegory of Canaan splitting from Egypt? Because Canaan was, if you look at a map of Egypt,
Yeah.
and the time of Ramses and before that, the 18th dynasty, 17th dynasty,
Yeah.
Egypt literally was all the way up to almost Turkey.
Right.
So
Right.
Canaan was just another part of Egypt. In fact, it gets even crazier. If you read Herodotus, which I'm a nerd and I have done this, which probably one of the very few people in the world that's reading Herodotus on their spare time who does that. But anyways, if you read Herodotus and you read what he says about Egypt, there's no mention of Israel. This is 500 BC, so it's ancient, but it's not like, we're not talking like 2,000 years ago. I'm gonna say 2,000 years before Jesus.
Sure.
You get what I'm saying.
I do.
Anyways, he never mentions Israel or like there being some separate nation over there. That's
Right.
part of Egypt. He
Right.
talks about the eastern coast of the Mediterranean just being part of Egypt. Like,
Yeah.
it's no different.
Yeah.
It's like,
it was like Poland in the war. It's like it is the Middle Eastern football. It's like, here's the Hittites up here, here's the Babylonians here, here's the Egyptians here, and whoever was in charge, the Syrians, you name it.
Yeah, and then so this blew my mind the other day. And I'll get back to the Joshua Bowen thing in a second, because I mentioned that. I asked him, I go, do you think it's possible this could? And he said it is possible. You just can't prove it. So
right.
I mean,
there's rabbis who say the entire Exodus story is one big allegory.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have to. Of course it is. Of course it is.
Israel thinks it's that.
And the thing that blows my mind is it's not even as old as we think it is. It's like,
well, I was just gonna say one of the only artifacts we have, one of the very few artifacts we have of ancient Israel that go back that far is there's like a stone,
the Minerva stela.
No, not that one. It's the one with Hezekiah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What's that one called again? I can't remember what that one's called.
Well, here's the thing: the ones that we have the best evidence for, Hezekiah, Josiah, the people you never hear about in Sunday school, those guys were real.
Yeah.
It's the
good point.
Joshua's, the Abrahams, the.
Oh, I found it. I want to show you this,
okay.
And I want to ask you. I'm not going to tell you. I want to ask you what you see on this that you think is interesting that you would not have expected. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me what you notice on this thing.
Okay. Oh, I see. It's a Quidditch reference, clearly, because there's the snit. I see a Ankh.
Yes.
Yeah, and
that is an Egyptian Ankh. What is that doing there? This is Hebrew. That's Hezekiah.
That's wild. Well, there you go.
There you go. This was just another part of it. Like, I'm not saying they were all speaking Egyptian and worshiping Osiris.
No,
but the cultures were probably mixed a little bit enough. Plutarch, believe it or not, I just found this out. Plutarch thinks that the god Ammon is how Egyptians the word that Egyptians say to each other. I
Uh-huh.
could pull this up, or I can just whatever. I can just paraphrase it, but it's in Plutarch's on Isis and Osiris is the name of the book.
Uh-huh.
He says that the god Ammon is the word that Egyptians use to incant the the invisible one. So you
Uh-huh.
say when you're trying to
Uh-uh.
bring the invisible one, or trying to like what's the word, like cast a spell or something, you say
Sure.
Ammon. And I
Gotcha.
almost wonder if
It's
that's
the
where Amen
abracadabra.
comes from.
If that's where what comes from?
Amen.
Oh.
I
Oh.
don't know. I can't prove it, but
I suspect we probably have a bigger handle on where amen comes from.
do you have an idea?
But off the top of my head, I don't remember where it comes from. I think it's Hebrew for "so be it" or something like that. But
That's what it means
let's
now.
not go down that rabbit hole, because
No,
that's
I know, but
um,
it's just one of those things that
yeah.
I don't know. You think if this is really an Egyptian colony, there's
Oh
got to
yeah.
be more
I mean,
influence,
clearly it was. I mean, we have the archaeological evidence for it. We know when they left. We know when they came back. We know who was in charge. And it wasn't until we started getting starting with the Bible, and then finding what the Hittites had to say, what the Assyrians had to say, what the Egyptians had to say. The
right?
more we found out about those guys, the better picture we had of what was going on for all those centuries.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, have you heard about the Elephantine papyri?
Yes.
That blows my mind. You've got
And
a century's worth of correspondence in this mercenary colony in Egypt, a Jewish mercenary colony, and they've got three gods they worship in the temple. They don't seem to have any connection to Moses or Joshua or this, and they're on great terms with the temple in Jerusalem at a time when supposedly there's only supposed to be one temple. It just does not match up anything that we know of from what we think of as Judaism, because Judaism had not existed yet. It wasn't until after the Babylonian exile
well,
that
actually,
we would recognize anything as Judaism.
I was just about to say this too, because I think that Zoroastrianism
Yeah,
sort of reshapes the new modern Judaism.
absolutely.
And
Could not agree more.
not only that, I think the influence is not just from Egypt or not just from wherever, but I think it's coming from all around them. Like in Deuteronomy,
Mm.
it talks about an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Well, you can read that right from Hammurabi's code.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
they're taking all these ideas from they're like this little buffer state that's just borrowing
Yeah,
ideas from everybody.
exactly. And it's like what we know of the history shows that, okay, if David was anything, he was a bandit kingdom who was working in the pockets of the Philistines. Solomon was just a dude, and everything about his court and things is an anachronism depiction of when the Assyrians were in town, 300, 400, 500 years later. Um,
Yeah.
there was nothing like that during the time that those guys were active.
And
I don't know if you've had Russell Demerkin on the show.
I just did actually. Yeah, he blew my mind with
Right,
and
right,
you
yeah,
checked into what he's saying. He's not wrong.
yeah,
All he's doing is taking facts and putting them next to each other for you to see them in one
yeah.
spot.
And
And
the
when
connections
you
he's
see them
made
like that,
between the Septuagint and the Torah and the Talmud being written at the same time, it's like it blows my mind that we could actually pinpoint the year that the Hebrew scriptures came together.
yeah.
Yeah,
I have to wonder if there was probably individual scrolls in transition around before
I
that.
mean, there's definitely, it's a patchwork for sure. There's bits
Yeah.
that are older than it, but it came into its final construction so much later than we ever were told in
I
Sunday
think he's
school.
right about that. Yeah,
Yeah, I think
he's
so
got a
too.
good point. And
And
he's
and
being
at the
taken seriously by
earliest,
academics too.
Judaism can't really exist the way we know it until after they get out of Babylon, the Babylonian captivity, and that's the impetus for creating all this national founding myth and all. It's them coming back and trying to, become Israel.
Yeah. So to take it back to Christianity now, because all we're doing here is highlighting that this has happened before. Like this is stuff that's been happening in the Mediterranean world, and it's happening in the first century still. I think the big question is, how does it get so big that it basically it absorbs itself into the Roman Empire, and then even becomes the state religion of the Roman
Right.
Empire?
Well, it
That's the
didn't have to.
question.
There was nothing inevitable about that process. If the Roman Empire hadn't gone straight to hell throughout the whole of the 3rd century, I mean, big time, 50 years of civil war, everything, all the structures and institutions just falling apart, that doomsday cult we call Christianity would have just stayed that, just almost something on the skids. Like the way John the Baptist cult became the Mandeans, and it's like they've been invisible, and yet they've been here this whole time, unless Saddam Hussein wiped them out during the 90s. But
that's a really good point.
Yeah, Christianity would be just that small and obscure, like the Druzes or the Samaritans today, you know. And Mithraism, we might be still talking about Mithraism, you know. But yeah, it was invisible until it became useful for Constantine. And maybe part of that was because his mother was a Christian. I don't know if that's one of those egg or chicken questions, you know. Did he become a Christian because she was, or did he, you know, anyway, we can debate that round and round. But for whatever reason, if it hadn't been for Constantine and his successors, Christianity would have just been on the skids. Yeah.
It seems like it's just like the perfect mythology for people living in the Eastern Roman Empire. So not just Jews, but like people in Egypt. So there's things for them to take serious. People in Turkey, modern day Turkey, Syria. So it seemed like it really caught on there.
Yeah.
And then once you get to like Theodosius, when he's like, okay, no more pagans, no more pagan temples, no more Lucianian mysteries. We're going to start taking all the funding away. We're going to start outlaw. Then it's no more mystery anymore, because now they're forcing it down everyone's throat. It's by the sword now.
And just think how much information we've lost about all that. It's a wonder we know anything about any of those. And like the Nag Hammadi Gospels, I mean, forget about it. Who would have guessed that Christians were writing stuff like that in the 3rd century, 4th century?
That finding was such a big deal that it almost like saves the, you know, like a lot of people like truth seekers and because without that, you really wouldn't know about
the diversity. Never know. And my favorite part of the Nag Hammadi library is that scroll. There's 2 scrolls: the blessings of Gnostic and the wisdom of Jesus, the Sophia of Jesus. Gnostic is a pagan tract that the guys are turning into a Christian tract by putting all the stuff that Gnostic is saying to his followers to Jesus saying to Matthew and something like that. They're only half done, so it's the perfect smoking gun. They buried them.
Oh, that's the one that was doing at the last minute. Say this one again. I remember hearing about this, but I can't remember exactly. Which one is this again?
The Sophia of Jesus Christ. Is a literal cut and paste of the blessings of Gnosis. I'm probably saying his name wrong.
Okay, and then that's the one that they were writing.
That's the one that they're taking the best bits they like and putting it in Jesus's mouth, saying it, you know.
And so
the disciples.
From what I heard about this one is that it wasn't finished, which means they were in the middle of writing it.
Right. So I mean, we still have the text. You can go look it up in books.
Right. But what that tells you is that was the current interest of these people. That was what they were into at that time.
And that Christians had no qualms about writing shit up that they liked and saying, Jesus said this, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. You sort of use him as like the tool for what philosophy that you
he's the clearinghouse. He's like Aesop or Homer, you know. These guys who weren't real either are taking things and they become Solomon becomes the clearinghouse for everything wisdom. Oh, Solomon said that. You know, Aesop said everything that's a fable. Aesop said it, you know. Confucius, boom, you know, Solomon. All these figures, you know, gravitate towards you know, they become the receptacles for all that kind of thing. And Jesus, that's why he has so many things to say, is because some people like what the Stoics said, so they put it in Jesus' mouth. Some people like what the Cynics said, they put it in Jesus' mouth. Some people like this line from this Greek play, so they put it in Jesus' mouth. You know, they just are magnets for all the things that people loved in the ancient world.
Yeah. And I almost wonder about Islam, because I know Islam, we're talking 7th century, but like,
but here's the thing, and it's only on my mind because I've been talking a lot about this lately. Like our first biography of Muhammad isn't until 60 years later. Our first
What do you think about
record
his
of
death?
what's that?
What do you think about his death? He just randomly just
Well,
dies like
yeah,
out of
he
nowhere.
apparently he died after 27 years of getting the Quran dictated to him, and yet 40 years later, after the official story says that the Quran was put together, we have caliphs just mentioning off the cuff that, oh yeah, we edited this and we distributed this. It's like, wait, I thought that happened back in the time of Caliph Uthman. No, it's there's all these things. The closer we get to the time of Muhammad, the dodgier, shakier, and non-existent the evidence becomes. And one thing you never hear about, at least from the Western side, is there's all these other prophets of the Arabs in that exact same time, and there's these wars of apostasies where all these false prophets show up in Islam.
Yeah.
And it's like Jesus, who has a very apt name that means Messiah, basically, Yahweh saves. Muhammad means the praised one. It can be a title or a name, just like Jesus. So we don't even know if some of the stuff was even about the guy Muhammad. It could have been about any of these other random dudes that we know.
Do you think
anyway, there's so much more to unpack there. I don't even want to
well,
go down that.
So when I talk about Islam, I almost wonder, and someone else was Simcha Jacoby thinks that.
Oh, don't get me started on that dude.
Oh,
don't
really?
get me started on that dude.
Well, he thinks that Islam might be like a final product of a centuries long like transition from an ancient Christian cult that made its way into Arabia and then became like Islam.
Well, he's onto something for this time, and most of the stuff he pulls out of his butt, it's just I have no
yeah
whatsoever. But yeah, that's what I was going to say about the Quran. Is there is some German scholars who've found that Syrian Christianity, the liturgical writing from this non-Trinitarian Syrian version of Christianity, has a lot in common with what later became the Quran. Right. So much so that, and this is like 100 years.
The cave story. Story. I don't know if you ever read the Quran. There's a story called the cave. Yeah. Where there's 7 sleepers, but in the Quran it says it might have been 7. Who knows? But anyways, there's a story in the Byzantine legend in Greek.
The 7 sleepers,
4th century or 4th century, about 7 sleepers going into a cave, waking up 300 years later, and it's under a Christian pious Theodosius, pious Christian leader. And before that, it was the wicked pagans. The same story is told in the Quran.
Exactly.
There's wicked pagans, they go to sleep, they wake up, and it's pious Islam. Okay, you got that one. Then you have the horned one, Dual Karnain, the 2-horned man. He goes to Gog and Magog. He puts up a wall. He keeps all the evil Gog and Magog wicked people out. He's the savior, whatever. He's, well, turns out the Greek Alexander romance talks about Alexander. He goes over to Gog and Magog, puts up a wall, says that he prays to Ammon. Ammon says, okay, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, it gets even deeper, though, because the coins that were in circulation from India to Rome have Alexander the Great with the horns on his head.
Yeah.
So whoever wrote that legend was thinking of, this horn guy he's our savior. He's colonized the world. He made the world better. I don't know, whatever they thought about him.
Yeah.
Thought good about him, obviously.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's like
there's a lot of those stories, though.
Yeah, and there's some stories like, and you can still see that wall that he built in China if you go all the way
there,
that kind of thing.
There's connecting dots that they just think that sounds cool.
Yeah,
but it's something that you understand from people back then. They would do something like that
for sure. But it just goes to show how interconnected all these are.
Exactly. That's what we talk about the whole time.
We could talk a whole hour just on some of this stuff on early Islam, and be here all day. But
yeah. Well, it reminds me of a fortune teller, like a good fortune teller will go out and they'll find information about somebody. They'll go on their Facebook page and check and see what they like, and then they'll go to them and say things that they'll play on their emotions a little bit. They found out that grandma likes the color red. Oh, by the way, I'm seeing red. My grandma, what is my grandma saying? Your grandma's saying everything's fine. She's going to see you again one day. Oh my God. Well, that's what Islam is doing, in the sense that Islam is using all these Byzantine legends and stories from like different
and pagan stuff too. They're drawn from the pagans too.
Yeah, you got
Yeah,
the
the
gene,
winged horse
the
that
jinn, that's
Muhammad,
pagan.
the jinn, yeah,
The
pure
jinn in
pagan.
the Old
Yeah,
Testament or
yeah,
anything.
yeah, yeah,
But anyways, so yeah, they're doing exactly what Christians did.
yeah,
They're making a religion. They're trying to bring everything into the fold
yeah,
from whatever's around them, and they're playing the people's emotions, and it's working.
absolutely.
And look what it did. Look what Islam did. You have all of Egypt, all of Libya, all the way to
Yeah,
Carthage, all the way
yeah,
to Spain, half of Spain actually. You got
yeah,
all the way
yeah,
to the Western or the Eastern Roman Empire. Pretty much all of it gets
yep,
engulfed by Islam, by
yep,
the Ottoman
yep,
Empire. So
yeah,
like, and then they're all the way in Indonesia now. So it's like Islam spread like wildfire compared to
sure.
Christianity.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's just that's what religions do.
Yeah, and you can actually, for Islam, the political aspect of it is so much stronger because it's between the Byzantines and the Persians, and those two empires. As long as those two were on top, we never would have had Islam. But as soon as they started weakening and let this power vacuum hit that the Arabs were able to take over, it's like they say, if Muhammad didn't exist, it would have been necessary to invent him. And you can say that about you can say that about Zoroaster. You can say that about Moses. You can say that about Jesus, all of them. Um,
Well,
but especially there because that's where the Arabs went from being, a football like Israel was to being their own thing. And that's when
exactly.
Arabic language took off. That's as a literature language, Syriac went away, Aramaic went away, Arabic became the new thing. Um, anyway, like I said,
No,
put on the
and
brakes because we could go all day for this.
yeah,
But,
no, and that's what I'll end it on is like there you have the people in Arabia are looking there at the world. They're saying, okay,
yeah,
uh, to the west of us, you had this giant Roman Empire, and they're
yeah,
Christians, and they're unified by Christianity.
yeah,
Over on the Persians, they're Zoroastrians and
yeah,
Mithra, but that's all kind of connected. And they're sort of united through that
yeah,
whatever that
yeah.
is. We need our own. That's going to help us out.
Exactly.
And so they
Exactly. And it looks like in the beginning they were trying to make a Jewish Christian hybrid religion where they wanted to get the Christians and the Jews to become a new thing.
yeah.
They're much more positive. And we've got this will blow your mind. We've got coins that they don't have a crescent, they don't have a star, they don't have Muhammad, they don't have the Quran verses. They've got Christian crosses on them
Yeah,
and yeah,
that's crazy.
and
Well,
and half remembered Jewish stories about so they think Moses' sister Mary is also Jesus's mother, that kind of thing they mix up. But
wow. Yeah,
yeah,
that's another thing. It's a lot of crazy stuff that's not even true. Like
right,
they just get stuff wrong and whatever.
right, yeah, it's such a. I mean,
The story of
every
Satan
religion.
falling. The story of Satan
If you
falling.
don't believe in
You know,
evolution, you've never seen a religion because every religion I can think of is just
yeah, good point.
Darwinian jungle of
Say that again so
evolution.
I can use that for the intro.
Yeah, if you don't believe in evolution, you don't believe in religion because every religion I've ever studied is a Darwinian jungle on steroids.
Well, and I promise it's the last thing I'm going to say. I'm going to
No
The
fun.
story of Satan falling in the Quran
Ah,
is actually a mistranslation of I don't know if you call it Gnostic, but like a heretical Christian text from Egypt
yeah,
from the Nag Hammadi scriptures
yeah.
of Azazel, or no, I think it is
SSL?
Azazel, which is the scapegoat.
Yeah, yeah. I
But
was gonna say.
I guess you could call him Satan. So that's what I can see why the Muslims
Yeah.
translated it into Satan, but that's not what it says in the text. It says Azazel refuses to bow to Adam.
Ah,
So they took that idea and they put that in the Quran and said Satan refused to bow to Adam.
too
So
funny.
you could see where they
Too
come
funny.
from.
I love it. It's just it never ends. It
It's
never
fun.
ends.
It's fun. I love reading that stuff, man.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I also like being a skeptic because it is what it is. Like I like the truth,
I think you're gonna like my next two books because
Plug away.
well, I was gonna say I've been working on a Sex and Violence in the Bible book, and actually it was Russell Gamerkin who kind of put a monkey wrench in that because I had a whole plans on uh, describing how these stories came to be written, and then he came around and it's like, oh, this blows my whole thing away. So I'm I'm gonna make that a different book altogether. I think if I even try to tackle that, I'll just. But sex and violence in the Bible, and it's actually sex, violence, and weirdness because I want to talk about all the things like monsters in the Bible, because
Yes,
there's
I
some
can't
mind
wait.
blowing thing.
I can't
But
wait.
before I do
That's such good news.
that, but before I do that, I think I'm gonna have to crank out a small book on the evolution of religion and this question of founder figures not even being real in any of the major religions, because that just blows my mind too much to ignore. And so I'm going to book some kind of special report or something. I haven't even decided what to call it yet, but, or how long it'll be. But
that's going to be hot when it comes out.
It'll be coming soon, and we'll talk. You'll love it.
All right, well, I got your Amazon in the description for people who want to buy the book, Mythic in Action. And that is all for now, and you have just attained true Gnosis.
You have just attained true Gnosis. The Demiurge has no power over you.